Hello and welcome to the Intel Brief. Today is Thursday, the 13th of August. I'm your host Daniel, and today we're going to talk about a missile threat has prompted, this is kind of old now, but a missile threat prompted a secret Trump jet switch. I just think it's a crazy story, so I wanted to include it. Iran has said there's no progress on the US interim peace deal, and Putin has visited a disputed Kuril island near Japan. So firstly, a credible missile threat forced a last-minute secret switch of aircraft carrying the US President Donald Trump, according to a source cited by Reuters. Security officials moved him onto a different plane to break the targeting picture built around his known movements. The episode points to a persistent and adaptive threat environment around the senior US principals, and to the operational value of unpredictability and executive protection. So what? The threat was clearly credible enough to trigger this pretty extraordinary protective measure, almost certainly reflecting they had a specific threat targeting that aircraft rather than generic intelligence wanting to target the president. For those of you who are not aware, the president was taken off Air Force One in a catering truck and moved on to a separate jet and flown back to the United States that way. However, nobody aboard Air Force One was aware of this, including, well, maybe he did know, but apparently other senior officials had no idea that they were on the plane. Sorry, the person that did possibly knew was Marco Rubio, who was also on the flight. So yeah, it's pretty interesting that these people weren't informed that they were going to be taking off during a pretty intense threat picture, and that there's the possibility they were going to get shot down. I think a missile able to range a presidential aircraft was highly likely sourced to a state or well-resourced actor. So the jet was in Turkey, so it's possible that militants tied to Islamic units, possibly Iranian-backed, had moved anti-air weaponry somewhere near the airport where the plane was parked. But they clearly didn't take a shot, because we would have heard about that by now. I think the public disclosure of the switch, I don't know if it's intended, but if it is intended to, if it was purposefully linked, I think it was trying to project competence to adversaries and how they move the president around, and also just muddy the waters around where the president might be, making further targeting of him extremely difficult. Though it's also possible that this was leaked inadvertently, which, has been happening a lot in this administration. And next, Iran said that there's been no progress in reviving the interim peace deal with the United States, signaling continued deadlock in indirect diplomacy. Tehran has tied any interim arrangements to sanctions relief and security guarantees, while Washington presses for verifiable limits on Iran's nuclear and regional activity. The stalemate keeps both sides in a familiar holding pattern with little momentum forward through durable frameworks. So what? I think a breakthrough in the near term is highly unlikely at this point, given the gap between sanctions relief and nuclear verification demands. Also, Iran has no real reason to give in to the US at this point. The US has no ability to apply pressure to them at the moment, as they've shown that the air campaign was unsuccessful in applying this pressure. So Iran is currently I've made a longer video about this if you want to check it out over on the other channel, but Iran is currently making something like $15 billion more than they were before the war in Iran. There's no reason why they would want to go to the negotiating table. The US, outside of currently blockading the Strait of Hormuz, as well as Iran doing it as well, so a bit strange, but that's the only real way the US can apply pressure, and Iran doesn't seem to care. Yeah, so I don't really know what the US's plan is here. Yeah. Iran will highly likely keep leveraging incremental nuclear advances as a bargaining pressure while the talks stall. Yeah, so they're just going to slowly ramp up nuclear production again, applying pressure to the US and Israel to come to the table and make some kind of deal that Iran wants rather than the US wants. So yeah. And I think a slide back into over-escalation is a realistic possibility, as diplomatic channels are currently seen to be exhausted. But as I've said numerous times, it doesn't seem to be effective, which doesn't mean Trump won't try it, but yeah. And lastly, Russian President Vladimir Putin has visited the disputed Kuril Islands and was shown sampling local fish, according to Russian media. The island was seized by the Soviet Union in 1945 and is claimed by Japan as part of its northern territories. It remains a live sovereignty dispute that blocks a formal Russian-Japanese peace treaty. Interesting. The high-profile visit projects Russia's control over the contested territory at a moment of strained ties with Tokyo over Ukrainian sanctions. So what? I think the visit was almost certainly staged to reinforce Russian sovereignty claims over the islands for both domestic and Japanese audiences. I think Tokyo will highly likely lodge a formal protest, though it is unlikely to shift the territorial status quo as it's been for a while. Progress on the Russian-Japanese peace treaty remains highly unlikely while the islands stay under demonstrative Russian control. Nothing's going to change. I think this is all just for show at this point. But still interesting to see Putin out in the Far Eastern regions projecting power. But anyway, that's been the Intel Brief. I've been your host, Daniel, and I'll see you again tomorrow. See you.